So I saw Argylle finally for the first time a couple of days ago. I actually recorded a review of this yesterday, but for some reason OBS was delaying my audio and it mishmashed everything. So this is my second attempt at trying to do a review of this. But I am also very late to the party because this movie has been out for, gosh, probably like 6 months now. And so I wanted to give my thoughts on it. This is an interesting movie, and I didn't see it when it first came out. And I'll tell you why in a second. I am a huge fan of Matthew Vaughn. I think he is on par with somebody like John Woo when it comes to this cinematic scope of action. This like mixing beautiful choreography, action, and just kind of in a really interesting way, and we'll dive into this. So, having been being a huge fan of Matthew Vaughn, I didn't go into this right when it first came out because it started getting all kinds of mixed reviews, and I said I'll push it back, and life happened, and yada yada. So I didn't see it when it first came out. And these are not going to be review videos. These are just movie thoughts. And I don't technically like reviews of movies where you give them a grade or you give them, some type of a point scale or something like that, because this is not that type of thing. This is just whether you should see it or not. I think it should be as simple as that. There's a lot of work that goes into making movies, and it's kind of a weird slippery slope of judging a movie on such a linear scale, and I think whether a movie is worth your time or whether it's not, obviously these are my opinions, and so I'll leave it at that. For the most part, I would recommend seeing movies even that maybe I don't technically like, or that I know I'm going to walk into it knowing that this might be a waste of a couple of hours. And there's a lot to learn. I think there's a lot to learn if you are, somebody who loves movies and are interested in why something doesn't work for you. And it's also great for me as somebody who aspires to make, movies and some type of visual narrative content is the best way to explain it, because I love visual storytelling, and I love storytelling in general. I love reading books, comic books, and all kinds of stuff. And I think there's just a lot of really interesting, gray areas when it comes to something like this. Anyways, having said that, love Matthew Vaughn. And I am actually sad that I didn't see this when it first came out. I really enjoyed it. So I won't get into any plot details. I think movies are better when you don't know much about them. Trailers often give away too much when you go see a movie, and I have started doing my last couple of videos where I play the trailer, and I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'll comment a little bit through it or whatever. But it also gives you an idea as to kind of like, if you haven't seen the movie, maybe you've seen the trailer, maybe not, and we'll play through it. We'll spend a couple minutes getting into the feel of what the movie is, and then I'll give you my 2 cents, and then we'll go from there. So let's pop over the trailer, and we'll come right back. Dua Lipa.
I certainly hope you dance as well as you dress.
And Henry Cavill's amazing haircut. He looks like Guile from Street Fighter.
You and I, we're not so different. Agent Argylle.
Mixed with M. Bison, maybe.
Little help? Hold on.
The book is phenomenal, sweetie, but
what happens next? It's called a cliffhanger, Mother. Ellie.
Catherine Hara, amazing. I love her. Bryce Dallas Howard, also awesome. Sam Rockwell, of course. The cat, of course.
Oh my God, you're Ellie friggin' Conway.
Author of Argylle series, Ellie Conway. I
Espionage.
Would you
Sign my book. Here we go. I love this book.
I do think this sequence was handled a lot more fun than Bullet Train, which I did enjoy Bullet Train, but this was... I wish Matthew Vaughn directed it.
People.
Real life spies.
Why would they care about me?
Because you're a goddamn fortune teller, Ellie. What you wrote in your new book actually happened, and you kicked a hornet's nest you didn't even know existed.
I'm in some really big trouble, Mom.
Oh, so now you're experimenting with drugs.
I want all assets.
Bryan
on
Cranston,
me now. I need her to
also
write the
great.
next chapter.
God, I hate that cat.
It's time for you to meet,
Of course.
the real Agent Argylle.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
In theaters. So I am actually glad I didn't watch the trailer right before watching this movie, because it was always kind of on my list. Because I feel like I learned more about... maybe not learned. I feel like I went into this a little bit more blindly because I didn't watch the trailer. I just watched the movie, and I watched this on Apple TV. And actually, in an interesting way, I watched this using my X-Real Air glasses. This is not a sponsored video, but I do use my glasses, pretty frequently, being a dad and, kids going to sleep. And I kind of want to just lay in bed and watch it in a huge cinematic way. Really great for that. Pop in my AirPods and just plug it into my phone. It's awesome. I love doing that. But anyways, so I watched this movie through my glasses, and going from there, I had as much of a cinematic experience watching this movie as I could. And at first, that first scene, which is the first part of this trailer where you see Henry Cavill and his amazing haircut and Dua Lipa, that first scene, it almost threw me off a little bit, because I started to see why many people didn't like it. The effects were super cheesy. The aesthetics were very, bright and vivid. It was very cheeseball. And the effects were cheesy. The effects weren't cheesy. They just didn't seem what you might call polished. And I hate even coming to that, term for it. But once we opened up and we saw where it goes from there, then we realized that I kind of was able to forgive, some of these things that might have looked a little way too over the top. If you see it, you'll see these, it already Matthew Vaughn has these ridiculous action scenes, and this opening scene had even more ridiculous action, and it played it to these like very much on point cliche moments. And you realize why, so we realize Bryce Dallas Howard's character is, writing this amazing novel series, espionage, with this character Argylle. And I'll try to stay out of plots, but if it gets a little spoilery, I'm sorry. Especially when I point out a couple of things, I'm sorry, but there it is. So I was pretty much on board after I noticed where it was going. And I think the reason why is because not having expectations is kind of a blessing and a curse. It can be. I do have, expectations for a Matthew Vaughn film, because most of his films were pretty consistent. The Kingsman, X-Men First Class, layer cake to a certain degree, but really, like, coming off of seeing The Kingsman and the second Kingsman, you realize what you're getting into with a Matthew Vaughn film. And I'm all for it. I love his cinematic style. I love the homages he seems to pay. And I think I think his movies are better for it. I think his kind of seemingly fusion of understanding action movies and understanding comic books and understanding, just cinema writ large. Like, I think he tends to borrow some of the things that make action really beautiful to watch and cinematic. And this movie played a lot of beats to me that a musical might play. And a musical doesn't have to hit those same beats like Singing in the Rain or something like that. I am a big fan of musicals because I think they're incredibly cinematic when they're done well. And some of my favorite, say, musicals would be some of the ones that are a little bit outside of the norm, even though they may have been very popularized, like obviously Pink Floyd The Wall, one of my favorites. And I'm not comparing this movie to Pink Floyd The Wall, but I think there's something to, there's a parallel in how the approach to dealing with, doing these things in a way that is great for movies and, is very much akin to something, the feeling like you might get on Broadway, but really to be able to do that through the lens and through the choreography and the colors, production design, all the things, music, the cues. It matches up very, very well. And I remember when I heard an interview with John Woo, and when John Woo would talk about his inspirations for movies. And, if you don't know who John Woo is, he's a Chinese filmmaker who made a ton of movies, and he got really, really popular for these ultra-violent, bullet ballet, operatic films. And the reason why is because, people like to say, well, it's the slow-mo, it's the two guns, it's that kind of thing. But I think really what it is he was very much inspired by the musical. He was inspired by, movies like Singin' in the Rain. And I think that's fair. And I think that's also fair to make this comparison because this movie is, I wouldn't call it violent, but it is definitely action-packed. And it has a lot of the same cues that work in the way that John Woo movies worked. Now, there was no flying doves, but there was pretty amazing music cues, beautiful choreography, and an underlying, tone that this movie had was also reminds me of something like when I watched RRR for the first time, or any Bollywood adjacent. I know RRR is technically not a Bollywood movie, but something Bollywood adjacent, these heavily mythic stories that that tell these kind of grandiose, have a grandiose landscape. And I think they did that with this movie. I think this movie feels like it could be a Bollywood movie mixed in with a musical, mixed in with John Woo, mixed in with, comedic and James Bond, a love of James Bond and espionage and a love of cinema. There's a lot of things that I think you can draw from seeing this movie in that way. Not in the way that this is going to be something like The Kingsman or even compare it to John Wick. I think this movie is very far from a John Wick movie. What it does have, obviously, is it's pretty obvious what the similarities are, and it's the action, the choreography, but John Wick doesn't play as strong to these moments the way that this movie does. And actually, The Kingsman, the original Kingsman, and to a certain degree, the second Kingsman, but John Wick has these action scenes. It kind of goes from what would happen in this scenario mixed in with this, and then the next scenario, and the next scenario, and they all kind of get and are very ridiculous, but they don't have these crescendos in the way that this does, or in the way that The Kingsman does. I think that's fair to say for Matthew Vaughn. So it doesn't have the ultra violence at all the way that John Wick does. This is a very tame movie. I was actually kind of surprised. This is a movie you could watch with kids, and also it has the point of view from Bryce Dallas Howard's character, and I think that was really fun to see it from her perspective, because it allowed the story to have a very lighthearted feel and character arcs that some throughout the movie, some of the plot points and arcs were, some of it could be telegraphic, and I was okay with it. Some of them actually did throw me for a loop and kept me engaged with it, and I laughed, and I also was surprised, which is great. That's what you want in a movie. You want to have fun with it, and this movie was very fun. That's the best way I would describe this movie. It was a lot of fun to watch. And I believe it's 2.5 hours, not 2.5 hours, 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, 2 hours 20 or something. And wasn't one point when I was bored or lost interest in the characters at all. I thought that Henry Cavill and John Cena, they were in it for very little. So this is where maybe if I would have seen this, where they heavily promoted Henry Cavill's character, you had expectations that this is going to be a Henry Cavill movie, like a very heavy Henry Cavill movie. Maybe I would have had those expectations, gone into it, maybe been disappointed because we didn't get a heavy Henry Cavill movie. I was okay with that. This is a very much a heavy Bryce Dallas Howard movie, which was awesome, and she was so good in it. And Sam Rockwell, also awesome, super fun. Everybody was cast perfectly, and I think going into this with those expectations, you'll have a lot of fun with it. There are a few key scenes that I think are really great. You saw one of them in the trailer, which is the smoke scene. We'll just call it that, which is why it had a very direct influence to me of something that you might see in a Bollywood movie. But also the way that they did it was so much fun, and it did still play very true to the characters and what they were, going through. And the choreography was a lot of fun. It was also beautiful throughout the movie. The fight choreography and the cinematography, the editing, everything was done really, really well. The music cues were perfect, and so that was a highlight scene. There was a lot. I'll just point out another one. Super. Obviously, these are ridiculous scenes. Like, I wasn't into this to see something that felt real. This isn't that type of movie. But I will give a little bit of a spoilery what I think it is, at the end of this, which I think actually plays well to the whole thing. But the other scene was the oil skating scene. So when you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you've seen it, then you know what I'm talking about. Utterly ridiculous. And I was already on board. I mean, look, Bryce Dallas Howard has a cat in her backpack, and they're running through, and everybody's shooting at them, and so you're going into this with a very tongue-in-cheek, expectation, and you already know with Sam Rockwell being Sam Rockwell, his comedic tone was on point, and so to expect anything different from that, I think is probably wrong. I think it's very spelled out what type of movie this is from the beginning. But having expectations that maybe the trailer or trailers and other promotional material might have set up for might have done it a disservice. I've heard other arguments about this movie with some of the visual effects being maybe not polished or anything like that. So I'll kind of wrap it up with this. I think that yes, in the beginning there was obvious LED wall use, obviously CGI, and all those things. But we'll get into spoiler now territory, and I'll kind of wrap it up with this. So it made sense to me that it would look not even ultra real, but it could look potentially a little fake. And I hate to say fake, but the aesthetic is what it is. And it worked okay for me because this was Bryce Dallas Howard telling her story. And, when you see the words fall off the page behind them in it seemed like a pretty obvious LED wall scene, it works, actually. It works really well. That's kind of one of the best use cases for doing something like this, is in these kinds of visual transitions. And I had no problem with that. I had no problem with, the other effects in the movie, because to me, this movie, the whole movie was kind of all in her head. So the opening, after the first scene with Henry Cavill, it opens with her then telling her story and reading her novel to an audience. And it also ends with her doing the same thing. So it kind of bookends what this is. Only in the end, or in the beginning, she didn't know how she was going to end this. She had a scene that was, stopped, and then she didn't know where she was going to go with it. And then obviously through the course of the movie, she figures it out, going on this crazy adventure. She ends it, and the people that she went on this journey with are in the audience, and she's kind of like pointing them out. And they're in the audience and they're nodding, and you kind of know what that is visually. It doesn't seem like anybody kind of acknowledges it. And then suddenly there's a cue that she sees Henry Cavill as like a redneck. And it's actually pretty funny because he's got like this like super curly like mullet. He's got some dip or something. And so it throws her for a loop. It's kind of like an Inception moment, I guess. So that threw her off. And so it cued me in going, oh, wait a minute. She was telling the story the whole time, right? And the story was all in her head. She's a writer that kind of talked herself into this story that she was a special agent all along. And I'm sorry that there was a spoiler, for this whole thing, but, you've had a lot of time to see it, and I've hopefully warned enough, because I hate spoilers. So, but that's kind of what this movie, it seemed to me, was about, was that she was a writer that was basically, telling her whole story. And we don't really know that until the very end when she goes. We don't really know that even at the end. Maybe they were in the audience and was the special agent all along. So the movie ends, and then we get the after credit scene. Well, since I was watching on Apple TV, I hate when they do this, where they automatically minimize the window and try to get to the next thing because you got to get right to the next piece of content. I hate that. I wish there was an option to turn all of that off. I know what they're all trying to do. It's like they're just trying to get the next stream going. But I miss movies when they were physical, and I have a physical collection, and I would hope to keep collecting physical media and treat each movie as its own thing and not be quick to jump to the next thing. Anyways, that rant is over. But I didn't watch the after credits scene, or not even after credits, like mid credits scene. And I kind of thought about this movie, and I was like, I'm a little surprised because I really liked this movie. I had a lot of fun with it. So why is it that people didn't like it? And I went and I started watching. I watched one video on YouTube, and somebody said something about an after credits scene, and I was like, oh my God, let me go back and watch that. So I watched it, and it was a Kingsman tie-in, which was cool. Very short scene. And it seemed to allude that there is a real character named Argylle, instead of, Bryce Dallas Howard's character being the play on words as R. Kyle, and this real Argylle character has something to do with the early Kingsmen, as it shows a young man going into a pub and asks for something specific and blah blah blah. So there's a tie-in, and so I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh, this is Matthew. Obviously, this Matthew Vaughn's like cinematic universe, and I think, and I could be wrong, but I think in an interview he said something about Marv and it being like the Marvel universe, but really like it's his own like tie-ins to things. So whether he does directly tie these in, or they all just kind of live in the same universe, and then maybe eventually the crossovers will tell this bigger overarching story. Super cool. I'm here for it, and I love that this is a very different feel of a movie than something like The Kingsman, because I feel like that would be a little repetitive. I think this is a great movie if you're going to expect, a rom-com for dudes, but also something that is very much in the vein of like an American Bollywood movie or a John Woo movie. And all of John Woo movies, not all of John movies were incredibly dark and ultra violent. There was a movie called Once a Thief, and he actually made a TV movie, and those were lighthearted caper movies. And so it doesn't necessarily have to have these like direct, inferences, but you kind of understand what it is. And if you're in for that kind of ride and you want to have fun with it, then this is exactly that kind of movie. So I would say I would recommend watching this movie. And if you've watched this all the way to the end and you haven't seen it, I'm so sorry for spoiling this for you. But I kind of had to point out some of those things just in talking about the whole movie. I think it's hard to keep out. So, like I said in the beginning, this is definitely a watch. Just go into it with the expectations that what you're okay with, knowing that this movie isn't ultra violent Matthew Vaughn, or even like a Henry Cavill, top tier kind of Henry Cavill movie, or or whatever. Just go into it hoping to get a really fun story. That's all I got, and I will see you on the next one. If you like this, do the subscription, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Hear my kid in the background. So I got to go, and I'll see you on the next one. Later.